Hey, what's up, y'all? So this is actually the first official podcast of the 2021 season, and actually is going to be an interview with my partners from MySoil, Predictive Nutrient Solutions. They are actually the makers of the soil test that is called MySoil. They also are the guys that do our soil test, the Yard Mastery test. And I wanted to do an interview with them because as of late, there's been a lot of questions coming up about their technology and why is it different from traditional soil tests. And so I figured I would give them a chance to come on board here and talk about their technology because it actually is different. You could even call it disruptive in a way. It's a newer technology being used, at least in this capacity. The one thing you're going to hear in this interview is that this technology is not new. It's been used by Monsanto, for example, and you may not like Monsanto, but the one thing you know about Monsanto, a very large agribusiness, is that they are not a stupid company, and so if they were going to use this technology, there must be something legit about it. But you know, this test is very different from the traditional soil tests that have been used for a long time in the lawn care industry and in gardening and everything else, right? But just because it's different doesn't mean it's bad. And that's one thing I want to point out here. I like this soil test because it's simple and because it's straightforward. There isn't any back math to do. There isn't any other data points that you have to take into consideration. You literally just look at the results and you apply fertilizers that fix or match those results, right? Those needs. Whereas traditional soil tests do require a little bit more thinking behind them. And by the way, if you use a traditional soil test, you're awesome. You're way more advanced than me. I have great respect for you, actually. And I'm glad that you have progressed to that level. I think that's really awesome. But I would also ask, in that same vein, don't have to look down on me or say anything bad about me. We are just different. And that's kind of what I wanted to get across here. You know, in the world of politics these days, things seem to be black and white. It's like, if you don't believe like me, you're bad and I want to shut you down. And I hope that doesn't happen over here in the lawn care industry. Really, you'll find that in most relationships in life, the real joy comes in the gray, right? Where you're black and I'm white and we meet in the middle in the gray. And that is really where the greatest advances in life have come. And so with that, I hope that you guys will enjoy this interview. I hope you'll get something out of it. And I hope that you'll understand a little bit more about the MySoil test and the Yard Mastery test going forward. With that, let's get right into the interview. One other thing I wanted to say real quick, head over to the Lawn Care Nut channel where I made a brand new video talking about street legal lawn care. I'm actually starting an entire series where I talk about lawn care. All right, so thanks guys for joining us. I am now joined by two of my favorite and best partners in what I do here in the DIY space, the guys from Predictive Nutrient Solutions. And we're going to go through and talk a little bit about their business, the soil tests that they have, what they do for us, how they work with us, as well as answer some questions that have come in from you guys. But before I go into that, I wanted to kind of explain a little bit why I decided to partner with Chris and Brennan, who you'll meet here in a minute. The first reason is I wanted a soil test for our folks. And when I decided that I wanted a soil test, I wanted one that was easy for DIYers to interpret. In other words, I wanted something that would meet the DIYer where they were with really basic information, not even necessarily basic, but straightforward information. Here's where you're at. Here's what you do. I didn't want to have a lot of other things that needed to be done, a lot of other math or a lot of other calculations that needed to be done in order to get to a result. I wanted something simple. That was number one. And number two, what I wanted was somebody that had the technology base behind it so that I could import this into our app. And that was very important to me too. And these guys have the technology bed that allows us to very soon now import the soil data into the app. So those were the two criteria I had. Now, obviously, there's other criteria that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to go deep into their soil test and the methodology behind it. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and introduce to you the owners of Predictive Nutrient Solutions. And they have a test called MySoil. And I just want to make everybody aware, in case you don't know, it's not a secret, but most people know. They have a test called MySoil that they put out into the marketplace, but they also are the bones and the brains behind our Yard Mastery test. It's the same technology. It's literally the same test. Some of our recommendations are a little bit different just because we have those customized to us, but it's the same lab. It's the same test. It's everything there. And so I wanted to go ahead and introduce these two guys, Chris Borgman and Brennan Ingram. I'm going to start with you, Chris. Why don't you go ahead and just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, thanks, Alan, for having us on the show. I know we've been wanting to do this for a little while, so I'm glad we got to put this together and I guess share our background experience in the industry and what we've developed as a team, which I think's been pretty disruptive, in this space in a good way. So yeah, for me, my background really started really at the age of 16 playing golf. Being on the golf course quite a bit. I saw the maintenance crew, guys cruising around in the bunker and little 3-wheeler rigs raking the bunkers and stuff. And I thought that'd be pretty cool, to be able to do that. And anyway, seeing the guys mowing and just seeing the transformation of a golf course, I kind of fell in love with it. I was able to actually get on the crew of my local golf course. I got on the maintenance crew at like age of 15. And worked, part-time while I was going to high school, and just really fell in love with, the golf course and turf grass management in general. And from there, actually started my senior year of high school, a running start program at the community college, one of the only ones in the country to actually offer turf grass management degrees. So I did running start in that program my senior year in high school while still working at the golf course. And, during that time when I was at the college doing running start, we had the opportunity to go volunteer at the LPGA tournament in Portland, Oregon at Columbia Edgewater Country Club. And I just remember the first time I stepped foot on a just the most pure golf course, you've ever seen. And I don't know how to really explain that feeling, but after that, I was just hooked, and I ended up finishing out my AAAS in turf grass management at the community college, and transferring to Washington State University, where I earned my bachelor's degree in crop and soil science. During that time at Washington State University, I actually went back and did an internship at Columbia Edgewater Country Club. And probably the best internship experience you can get. I actually was able to help construct and grow in a 9-hole golf course and practice facility. So just an unbelievable experience, in that industry at that point, in my career. And after finishing up my bachelor's degree, I actually went on back to Columbia Edgewater Country Club as an assistant golf course superintendent. And while I was there, really fortunate to work under probably one of my greatest mentors to this day, Gordon Kiyakawa. He was the one that really taught me the business side around, golf course, turf grass management, and how to, blend that with fertility programs, right out of school. And he actually offered me the opportunity to be a superintendent of that 9-hole course that I was able to construct and grow in. And so, right out of school, I was developing my own fertility programs, cultural programs. I think probably one of the best experiences, you could get right out of college. And, from there, just really use that as a stepping stone to get back to my hometown. They were going to be building a brand new links golf course here in Walla Walla, that's southeastern Washington State, a really high-end links golf course. And fortunately, I was able to get back to my hometown, be involved in the whole construction and grow in a Wine Valley Golf Club where I was at for about 3 years. And, totally different golf course than Columbia Edgewater, which is your parkland country club, pretty lush green, really good fertility, and then go into, a links course where you're on the edge of, barely green and dead, every day. And really helped me develop my, fertility programs and really understand which products work best, at very low rates, but provided, great response. And while I was at Wine Valley Golf Club, that's where I actually was introduced to Brennan Ingram, which is my business partner that you introduced. He actually came out there one day and was introduced me to the ion exchange resin technology developed by Dr. Scogli out of Montana State. And I started playing around with this soil testing technology, and it really just blew me away. Everything that was kind of compacted into this one test. It kind of took everything that I had learned, throughout my experience, my college experience, and then, in the field up to that day. It just took everything I had learned and kind of combined it in this one measurement. And, from that day, I actually made a career change from an industry that I was never going to leave. I was so passionate about being a golf course superintendent and, being on the golf course every day. But there was just something about, this technology and the fact that, it hadn't been positioned correctly in industry out of academia, and there was still a lot of space to do this. And so made a career change to another company, worked with Brennan, at that company. And one of the things I did right out of the gate was actually worked on a grant with the Northwest Turfgrass Association. And the main focus of that grant was really to take the resin tester technology and correlate that to tissue analysis. And so what we did is we actually went to a number of golf courses across the Pacific Northwest. And on those golf courses, on the greens, what we did is we actually took like an electric lint remover and that you'd use on your clothes, and we actually collected tissue from the greens. And each spot where we did that, we collected a soil core as well. So we knew that we had direct correlation between the tissue and the exact soil in that exact spot. We combined those all together. And what we found at the end of the study was that the resins were a true leading indicator, almost like taking a tissue test in the soil, but a true leading indicator what that plant was going to see, 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road. And so to kind of expand on that, I moved into pretty heavy into the working with agribusiness companies across the U.S., some of the largest agribusiness companies, and taking that same philosophy of correlating resin analysis to tissue analysis and be that leading indicator. So I help manage answer plot systems across the United States, where we looked at a ton of different soil types, cropping systems, and develop protocols to collect samples and soil samples and tissue analysis. And then again, we were able to correlate what we were seeing in the soil with the resin, and be the leading indicator to what that plant was going to see, weeks in advance. And actually was able to take that information that we gained from that and present it at the International Symposium for Soil and Plant Analysis in Kona in 2015. So that was the first time where we really took everything from academia, tied it into, real life decisions, at the farm gate, and presented that, to everybody globally involved in soil and plant analysis. And so that was a pretty big breakthrough for us. And then, that was followed up by Dr. Beck from Winfield Solution presenting the same data. And so that was really the point in which we kind of, broke through, that we knew we had something that we could position in front of, a community and get it into an actionable product where we could make recommendations and, provide real guidance. And really, that time when we were working with the agribusiness companies was really, where Brennan stepped in, and his component of, what we do today really started to blend together. And I guess I'll probably, turn it over to Brennan, maybe to, take it over from here, what we did, with labs and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alan, for having us on here. My name is Brennan Ingram. Professional background, I spent the last decade or so in the commercial agriculture and home lawn and garden markets, with a focus on the ion exchange resins. I was heavily involved on the laboratory side and worked with some of those large agribusiness companies and getting their labs set up and managing the laboratory analysis of the ion exchange resins. I also worked with the ALP program and Dr. Bob Miller in setting up interlaboratory comparisons and evaluations using the ion exchange resins. And through that, really found that the ion exchange resin had a very low deviation across labs, and the data that we were seeing, met or exceeded any type of requirements, currently in, commercial interlaboratory evaluations. So
what Brennan's kind of saying is, when you say you send, the same soil sample to 5 different labs, they want to look at the accuracy of all of those running the same method across labs and what the deviation is, between labs. And we showed a very good, very low deviation, across labs with this technology and the methods that we run.
So we're going to get into the specifics for sure. And I want to go deep into the pool, and I want to go shallow into the pool. So there's a bunch of terms you threw out, which we're going to get through. But just so folks watching understand, when you say you worked in agribusiness, tell me what that means and what you were doing with agribusiness.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Chris, I guess when I say agribusiness, you're dealing with, I would guess, more of the large scale farming type communities. You're talking about Winfield Solutions, like Monsanto, DuPont, Pioneer. You're talking the biggest players in those industries that really, kind of guide, I guess, all commercial agriculture. So
how would they use the resin technology? What were they trying to do? They've got a field, they need to have inputs in the field before they plant. Is that what they're doing? Or is it this, how do they use the technology?
Yeah, so it really depends on the timing, the sample timing and the year, and what they're trying to do. But in general, we had the conventional or the traditional soil analysis. We had tissue analysis, but there was not a very strong correlation between what we were seeing with the traditional analysis and what the plants were showing in the field. And so they knew that there had to have been some other indicator that would relate to what that plant was going to see in the field. And so that's why they started looking at the resin analysis for this type of information. And really the really disruptive part about the resin analysis compared to the traditional test is that a traditional test is looking at what might be available or a total extractable amount of nutrient. But the resin, we have a key measurement called pounds per acre per day. And it's really disruptive because if you look at, how yields have kind of plateaued in most crops, it's because the demands that plants have on the soil of these higher yielding crops, like potassium, for instance. Potassium in corn at peak uptake can reach up to 15 pounds of K2O per acre per day. But we've only had a measurement of total nutrient in the soil, but we didn't know if the soil was releasing that nutrient in forms and fashions to match those uptake demands. So with the resin technology, the way of positioning it is coming in between those peak uptake demands, see what our pounds per acre per day release is in the soil, and then be able to amend that soil to hit those peak uptake demands that crop has on that soil. And that was really how we wanted to position the technology in that industry and really, increase yields, quality, and also nutrient density in crops. We use, even in turf grass, we still use the pounds per acre per day model to help us establish our sufficiency ranges that we use today. Obviously with tweaks for turf grass because, it's a perennial crop that we're managing all the time versus an annual crop. And that's really how it was positioned in commercial agriculture. And we still work with companies today. Our main focus is obviously the DIY homeowner market with the MySoil product, but we also are working with universities as well as in the controlled environment ag sector, kind of on the side as we continue to focus on the DIY market.
Good. So as we talk about the DIY market, so I'm getting, basically, if I was going to use a layman's term for what the resin technology is, and we're going to get into it in a minute, I would say it's real-time data. Is that a proper way to say it in layman's term?
It's different. We'll get into this a little bit, but it's different than, like, I think a real time, more like the soil paste extract, right? Where they take a soil into the lab, they saturate it and they suction it out, right? They're looking at what's in solution, right? Which is very available to a plant for uptake. The resin is going to absorb, those available nutrients out of solution. If they're available, it's going to absorb that, but it's going to go beyond that and start to exchange and kick off nutrients from exchange sites. And that's where it goes beyond just the snapshot of the soil paste to nutrient release over time. So it isn't really as much of a snapshot as some people have positioned it, like the soil paste extract, because we're really looking at that plus the ability of that soil to release nutrient over time.
Interesting. Okay, so and I want to get more into that, but before we do, because this is good. We went down deep into the pool a little bit quicker, but that's cool.
Yeah.
It's fun. So let's go back to some basics, and I'll put a soil test up on the screen so people can see it. But just tell me, first of all, why would it be a good idea for a DIY or somebody in my audience, somebody that follows my programs, why would it be a good idea for them to get a soil test in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, really the key in reasoning behind getting a soil test is two main reasons. One, properly select and guide fertility products through the data-driven decisions. And then secondly, guiding applications and rates and frequencies to allow, for those like sustainable applications.
Okay, so we're basically dialing it in. Instead of me going to the store and getting something and throwing it down and hoping for the best, which will show me some results. If I can optimize my results, I should be able to maybe save some money, get better results over time, get more sustainable results. And so it kind of just dials the strategy in, right? It's kind of like taking your phone, using it out of the box, it works, but maybe you want to do some tweaks so that it works better for you personally. So totally understand that is exactly how I position soil tests. So with that, then let's go into now, we've talked about the resin technology, which I want to get a little bit more into that because your philosophy, your approach, your methodology, I don't know if I'm using the right terms, is different from what I would call traditional tests. Now, I know there's different words and there are proper terminologies for these tests, but what makes your test different? And then what would you say because it's different, what advantages would that bring?
Yeah, so I think we've covered a little bit maybe of why it's different than a traditional test, but in the most, I guess, easily digestible sense of, how we position it or why it's different is, a traditional test, you're gonna send your soil to a lab. At the lab, they're gonna go ahead and they're gonna dry that soil. They're gonna grind it or pulverize it. They're gonna sieve that soil. And then what they're gonna do is based on the lab, what methods they run, there's a number of different extraction methods, which we'll get into later probably. There's a number of different extraction methods that can be run, but what they're going to do is take that dried and ground soil and then they're going to go ahead and run different analysis on it where they're adding, say, strong or weak acids, to a soil depending on, a number of different parameters. They're going to add an acid. They're going to extract what's available in that soil and maybe like a total. We don't know always what extraction's best for a particular soil because it's so dynamic and so related to, soil type, mineralogy, pH of that soil. So we're just trying to get an idea of, what could be available to a plant and what is going to give us a fertilizer response. Is really the goal of the traditional test. The resin test differs in the fact that we use the customer's field moist soil. So they collect the soil from their lawn or their garden. We have, specific ways that we like to, guide people to collect soil, with our soil probe and some other mechanisms. We like that approach because we force people to collect a larger amount of subsamples, across an area, which gives us a better composite, of a lawn or a garden. From there, they're going to add that soil to our test. Our test includes deionized water and the ion exchange resin capsule. They're going to add it to that resin capsule in the DI water, which is going to saturate it. That's going to start the absorption. The resins are going to then absorb all the available nutrients from that soil. So if they're in combined forms or not available to the plant based on pH or other factors, the resin's kind of accounting for that, all of those dynamics for us, which is why we really like the the technology and how it works. And then from there, it's going to go to the lab. We do a 5-day absorption. So usually by the time it gets to the lab, it's ready to, be analyzed. And, that method that we use to analyze is also different because we already absorbed all the nutrients from the soil. So now all we're going to do is we're going to clean off that resin capsule. All the nutrients are adhered or absorbed into the resin capsule. All we're going to do is clean it off with deionized water, remove all the soil particles, and then all we have to do is one extraction over the resin to strip off all the nutrients that were absorbed by that resin. And then that goes to 2 different analytical machines, one to measure nitrate and ammonium and the other to measure the 11 other nutrients that you see in the test. So again, just different methods, different way of looking at, nutrient availability, which I hope we can dig into a little bit here. But in general, that's kind of the difference in how those methods work.
So, yeah, go ahead, Brennan.
I was just going to elaborate. I know, Chris, maybe just for further clarification, people might want to know, I guess the analysis performed on ICP, and then we use color metrics. So for the nitrate, it's cadmium reduction, and then the ammonium it's gas diffusion. Both of those are color metric measurements. So just to elaborate a little bit on the methodology.
And the resin, so would I be able to say it's like an artificial root? It's like literally an artificial root that is now sitting in water that's got the soil all around it. And so it's literally, I guess, a root that is taking in the nutrients just like your grass root would. Would I be, right to say it that way?
That's how it's really been, positioned in industry, is really a synthetic plant root. And the reason that we think of it that way in a general sense is because the specific blend of resins we use are charged with hydrogen and hydroxide ions. And those are 2 of the same ions released by plant roots in natural soil environments. And so we like to use those exchangers. So, in simple, just like a plant root's going to release hydrogen in order to take up other nutrients out of solution, the resins do that same functionality. So we're really focused on, it's the rhizosphere of the plant, essentially, or the root, right? And that's an area, directly around the plant root that's typically, more acidic than maybe the bulk soil pH, but that's the area that really determines what nutrients are available to the plant. And the ion exchange resins really account for, what's actually going to be, available to the plant, really correlating to rhizosphere and the availability. And I don't know, you guys can, look up rhizosphere and go down the rabbit hole of that. But, generally as that plant or those roots grow through the soil, they're mining nutrient as it grows through the bulk soil. And that pH and what that plant sees is very different, at the root tip, than maybe what's available, in the bulk soil.
Yeah, that's where all the microbes are at too, in the rhizosphere. Right. So I wanted to ask real quick. So this technology was invented at where and by who?
Yeah, it was developed by Dr. Earl Skogley at Montana State University. He was the one to really start to look at the use of ion exchange resins for kind of multi-nutrient measurements or dynamics. So with one test, you could absorb or extract many different nutrients. He was the one to really break through and start to look at nutrient availability with the resins. The resins there's thousands of different types of ion exchange resins that are used for, a number of different platforms, most commonly like water filtration systems, right? We can run water through a column of ion exchange resins. You can have resin specific to stripping out all the calcium, magnesium, sodium out of the water and essentially purifying the water. We just happen to use a blend that can only absorb nutrients in the forms available to plants.
Okay, so this isn't some technology that somebody just developed only for this and you guys are like just using it for this. This is used in dozens, maybe more of applications across many different industries.
Yeah. The resins
Absolutely.
themselves are used, in a lot of different industries. And, the resins themselves, as far as, where it went from Dr. Scogli, there's hundreds of publications or research articles on the use of ion exchange resins. You just have to, really dig through them and understand what methods they used when they did it, because everybody kind of did their own thing with them when they played around with them. So when you read through publications, it's really important to really understand what method we're using in comparison to what was used in the publication. There's some publications where the resins are buried in the soil, and left in a dry desert for, a certain period of time, where they're probably not going to absorb, much nutrient under those circumstances. So, and there's different extraction methods and things that have been used. So it was really just, taking all of the things in academia, combining them all together, and then positioning them in a way that the DIY or homeowner, and even, the higher level ag market could use and understand to facilitate fertility decisions.
Yeah, and I want to stay on this just for a minute, because this is really cool. So I could look at this like this is actually cutting edge technology. This isn't, again, I talk in different terms, but there's the old school way and there's the new advanced, technologically advanced. There's the Elon Musk Tesla way. I mean, I'm kind of looking at this way, like this is advanced technology here. That's how I'm kind of getting at it. What I would like to do now is, if you guys don't mind, is I want to go into some questions, because we get a lot of questions about the soil test every year. And so I asked some folks in our group, and so we'll just go through these. And then there's one where we can actually look at a couple different soil tests too. So that's where we'll get a little bit deeper. But Perfect. For the first one, let's just go here. And this one comes from Jonathan McDonald. He says, why do the resultant parts per million values and optimum ranges differ from other soil tests I've seen available on the market? My limited understanding is that it has to do with the way the test is conducted and seeing plant available versus total nutrients. Is that an accurate statement? And is the approach you've taken in some way done with the DIY customer in mind?
Yeah, great question. I think this will tie into, some of the things that we already went over, but yeah, so result values or optimal ranges are going to differ depending on the method used. We kind of talked about a couple of different methods, one being the ion exchange resins, but there's a number of different soil testing methods that are used out there. And so when you look at, parts per million values compared from one method to another, you can't directly compare those because the extractions were performed differently. And so those numbers, mean different things. So comparing, directly across from one method to another, doesn't work. So, the soil paste method that we talked about is going to provide, different optimal ranges and ppm values than a Malik 3, an Olsen, or a Bray. And they're all going to have different sufficiency ranges. And that could be based on a probability of fertilizer response, and it can all be specific to, an individual crop as well. Traditionally, the type of extraction has been dependent on soil type and pH parameters to estimate probability, and it can be very specific to an area or region. A lot of soil tests are specific to, say, like the tri-state Rex and the upper Midwest. They're very specific to, just a few states. And so everybody positions them differently. Our goal, obviously, with the MySoil Yard Mastery test is to really streamline the complexity of choosing, is the Malik better for me, the Olsen, the Bray, or the soil paste, but really streamline the complexity of, selecting and interpreting, a soil test and just creating a successful fertility program. So obviously, as we mentioned, our parts per million values and optimal ranges are for the ion exchange resin. And we do that because it provides, we like this method because it provides, a very dynamic measurement of nutrient availability and release, as we talked about. And it's directly determined by that individual soil sample and its related chemistry. So we're not trying to say, okay, based on this high pH and this extraction, this should be available. The resins are already accounting for the pH of the soil, what's available and what can be taken up by the plant. And that's really the most, dynamic aspect of it. So that range is different. The parts per million that we get is going to be different than, let's say, the Malic 3 extraction that you might see on a different soil test or from a different lab.
Yeah, so if I was going to boil it down, I would say that Malic 3 or Larry Curly and Mo 5 and 7 and all of those others, apparently these are all people's names that have developed these different methodologies, I'm assuming, but they all have their own way of approaching, but nothing can be as accurate as the actual root in the actual soil. That is the most accurate. Everybody else can say what they think, but if you actually have the plant root in the soil, that is where the rubber literally meets the root, or where the nutrient literally meets the root. And that is what the resin technology does, is it's a literal root in the literal soil. So I just don't see how there could be anything more accurate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, plant roots, exudate, different chemicals and forms of compounds. This is the most synthetic way that we can represent, what's actually happening, in the rhizosphere. So obviously there's some other extraction methods, that have been developed, focusing on, what other plant root exudates and what could be available. But in the most simple synthetic form, this is the most accurate thing that we've found to correlate to what the plant's going to see in the field under your specific soil conditions.
Awesome.
And then we just take this information, and tie our agronomy background, our fertilizer chemistry knowledge, to these results. And that's what you see in the end with the Yard Mastery and MySoil test.
Cool. All right, let's go to the next one. This one comes from John Gardner. He says, I hope that you're doing well. We're holding up best we can here in frigid Minnesota. For the podcast, I'd like to know if there's a sweet spot that is the ideal time to take your soil samples for testing. What I mean by that is, should I wait X number of days after I last fertilized before taking a sample, or are you safe to take it anytime? I didn't know if recent fertilizer applications would skew the results by taking the samples too soon. Thanks for all the great content, John Gardner.
Gotcha. Yeah, Chris, I can go ahead and take this one. John, this is actually a question, we get quite often. I would say that you would definitely want to avoid sampling directly after any type of fertilizer amendment event. I would generally say 3 to 4 weeks after, you should be able to sample. What you're really looking for is making sure that fertilizer, is well watered and incorporated into that soil before you go back and soil test. Some additional things to kind of think about is, if you're looking at sampling maybe year over year, try to mirror, time frame. Say, you like to sample in March. Try to keep that pretty similar if you're trying to look over trending year to year. But, you can test essentially all year round, but try to avoid those time periods, leading or right after an application.
Yeah, I've always told people to, especially because nowadays a lot of people are using polymer coated ureas that are extended release. You have to kind of know what you have applied. If you've applied one of these products that's an extended release over 90 days, that's going to change versus if you're just applying straight urea, things like that. For the most part, we tell folks if they're using our fertilizers, 45 days, you should be safe, because we do have some polymer coat type stuff. But yeah, for the most part, if you guys are using straight urea, nitrogen, things like that, that all works out. All right,
And Alan, actually, I was going to say that's a great thing you bring up, because people a lot of times actually use the test to evaluate, efficacy of a given product. And so, understanding if you do have a large portion of that's slow release, people will go out like, hey, I'm not seeing this in my test. And the reality is that product's not broken down yet. So that's definitely a good thing to keep in mind.
Good. All right, let's go to the next one. This one comes from Bill Camillo, and this one we're going to have 2 different soil tests we're going to pull up and put up on the screen next to each other. So Bill is a fellow Floridian, and he says, I have a question about their method of testing and why it may produce a different result when compared to the M3 test. Last year, I sent the same batch of soil to MySoil through the Yard Mastery kit, and also to Waypoint Analytics, who used the Malic 3 form of test. The results in the pH number between the 2 tests was an entire point off from each other. which, just to clarify for the audience, that can be quite a bit on this logarithmic scale. At that point, it left me scratching my head on which test to work with. So the pH from his yard mastery test came in at 6.7, and the pH from his waypoint test came in at 7.7. And we'll put those up on the screen. And he also had some other numbers that were different. He says he does like the YM numbers better because obviously the pH looks more favorable. So,
Yeah.
Hey, if that's the case, let's just walk away. But he's, Bill's done a lot of thinking. He says here, devil's advocate, as you may know, the amount of soil sent to both labs is very different. Human nature is going to think that because I sent a whole pint of soil to Waypoint versus a small scoop to MySoil, the Waypoint test must be more accurate, right? Maybe they can address this as well. I just thought I'd send a copy of both tests. So we have quite a bit to unpack here. Let's kind of start at the top, and then if I need to refresh you on what the question is, let me know. But at the top, he's basically kind of talking about the Malic 3 versus the predictive nutrient solutions test and why were the pHs off by an entire point.
Okay, so I guess to start, I think we'll expand, kind of on the first question that we talked about, different extraction methods. So obviously the Malic 3 is going to provide different ppm results than the resin analysis. So that's the first thing. So because we're running different methods, the results are going to be different as far as ppms. Although I guess our hope is that the ultimate results would trend similarly, even if some of the values are different, they would trend similarly or guide a similar fertilizer application recommendation. But really, even sending the same soil to multiple different labs can also yield different results. So you can send, soil to 4 different labs, the same exact soil sample. They can run a Malic extraction, and you can also get, different parts per million values from those labs, similarly to what we talked about a little earlier. So typically, if you have a lab you like and you're happy, they want you to, stay with that lab. So again, if you find something that works for you, stick with that lab. Just understanding bouncing around labs or comparing labs is just going to get very tough to, for one, interpret, and it often is going to confuse more than provide some type of solution.
Is that because their equipment can be calibrated differently, or is it just different brands of equipment or age of equipment? Or like, if it's science, why would it be different if 4 different labs across the country are running the same test? Why would they come out different?
Yes. Yeah. You want to do that one, Brennan?
Yeah. I mean, it really, I guess there's variability just, in the sample itself. I guess there's just a lot of points where you can have change, it could be different instrumentation, different standards, there's just so many different things that can really vary on those type of systems, that it's hard to say one thing exactly. There's just a lot of potential variation.
So
I mean,
for
I've
example,
seen this in blood tests too.
One lab for higher throughput, they might, instead of drying a soil for overnight, they might try to push that to only be a few hours, which can be different than another lab that possibly dries it overnight. Just for an example, is one reason where you may see some differences in analysis across labs.
Okay.
And then the second part, the pH, was another part of the question that I heard. At MySoil or Predictive Nutrient Solutions, we use a saturated paste method for pH, and I believe it depends on the lab. A lot of them will run a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2. It really just depends on what their preference is. Again, what pH method they run. The saturated paste method tends to be more acidic. The 1-to-1 and like a 1-to-2 starts to increase on average to be more alkaline than the soil paste that we run.
What do you
But
mean
again,
1-to-1, 1-to-2? Break that down real simple
that's
for
the
me.
ratio of the amount of water to soil that you add together to make the solution, in which is pH. So there's just different ratios of water to soil.
Okay, so you're physically out of that cup when you get it, you're physically removing that soil from there and moving that over to this paste test?
Yeah, so we directly measure the saturated paste that we get at the lab. At the conventional analysis, what they're going to do is, they're going to dry pulverize, take a portion, or like say, 1 or 2 grams of soil with 1 to 2 mils of water, or whatever their method is, and then they're going to shake those for an amount of time and then pH it.
And what you're doing is you're just taking the water that's already in the cup that we sent and you're pHing that.
Correct, because the way we do that with the volume to volume is what allows us to do that.
Okay.
Volume of water to volume of soil.
So to boil that down, the difference is just the method?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So the difference is the method. We like the saturated paste method for pH with the resin, kind of what we talked about before. Rather than focusing on the bulk soil pH, the area that really determines that final nutrient availability is that more acidic area around the rhizosphere. So what's available in the bulk soil can be substantially different than what's available to the plant root as it grows through that soil, as we talked about before. And that's why we like to be, we look at the more acidic or trend more acidic on our pH.
Okay. So that kind of gets into the last part of his question here, where he goes he's very observant. He says, it seems like with Waypoint, he's sending them a lot more soil. So, and he's sending a lot less. So it just seems like they're going to do better just because they have more soil, but that's not really the case. It's what you do with what you have.
Correct.
Yeah, Chris, I guess I'll go ahead and answer this one too. So I guess, yeah, I can definitely see how people in optics wise, you would think that, cause you're sending, say a pound of soil to Waypoint. The thing to keep in mind there though, is that of that pound of soil for each extractant, you're talking 2 grams of that entire sample is actually, being used for any given extraction. And which is why we really focus, I guess, on the front end before it ever gets to the lab to really drive that sample consistency. And it really is, we developed a soil probe specifically for our test kit. If you look at some of the other soil probes on the market, they're a little bit larger, collect more soil, which, a customer could get away with, take a couple, 2 soil cores and you're completing a test, which, doesn't really create a very good composite sample. Our soil probe, quite a bit smaller than those, is really designed to require that user to take, multiple samples across an area to ensure that that sample, when it gets sent to us, is, a good representative composite of the area they're testing. So I guess for us, it's really, rather than thinking of it like at the labs, we're trying to get it ahead of that. Because really, regardless, I mean, you could go get a pound of soil, with a shovel and send it to Waypoint, one shovel. And, it's that kind of that garbage in, garbage out philosophy, I guess.
Totally. And to expand a little bit on what Brennan said, in the end, when you look at the amount of soil, say like the Malik 3, requires 2 grams of soil, dried soil, ground soil, to perform the extraction. So really you sent in, a pound of soil, but, between the pH, the Malik 3 or whatever extraction, and depending on the suite of analysis you get, the resin analysis with our method, you probably actually use more soil than the conventional lab actually uses to run the analysis or perform the analysis. The remaining amount of that soil is just, tossed in the dumpster.
Mm-hmm. All right, with that, then why don't we go and actually look at the 2 reports side by side? I've been putting them on the screen anyway, but we can kind of talk through them. So obviously I took his address out and everything, but this was run at the Florida lab. Waypoint has several labs, and this was run at the Florida lab. So on the left is the Waypoint, and on the right is the yard mastery test. So you want to talk through those?
Yeah. Okay. So I got the 2 tests pulled up here in front of me. So we're just going to talk through both of these tests real quick and look at the difference and, the methods, and then ultimately what, decisions are made from each of these tests. So if you look at the waypoint test here, so they're running soil pH. It says 1:1. So 1 portion of water to 1 portion of soil. So the same proportions. So they got a pH of 7.7 on this particular sample. And then we can also see that they're running the M3, which is the Malic 3 extraction. So this is showing the Malic 3 extraction results. So we have a pH of 7.7, and we're running the Malic 3. Now I'm looking at the results on the waypoint, and I see very high calcium levels. I see, phosphorus showing in the optimal range. But one thing I'm looking at here is with a pH of, 7.7, for the Malic 3 extraction, I don't know if this is the actual right extraction based on what I'm seeing here. Because of this high pH, you might need to run maybe like an Olsen extraction for phosphorus. And the reason is because we see these high levels of calcium in the soil. We have high pH, so there's a high probability that calcium and that phosphorus is actually combined to make calcium phosphate at this high pH. And so there's a chance that phosphorus is actually not available, that the acid extraction actually broke those bonds apart, making the phosphorus look like it's available when it might not be. And if we look over here at the yard mastery test, we can see that on the scale, it is showing phosphorus to be low. We still see the high calcium, and we have a little bit lower pH. I think it's 6.7 here. I can't see the raw
Yeah,
data.
it is. Yep.
Has 6.7. So what we talked about earlier is all these nutrient dynamics and how the resin can capture this. And what we're seeing here is the resin analysis is showing us that phosphorus is actually below optimal. And based on the waypoint, we see it's, at optimal. But because of that high pH, maybe that extraction's not the right one for this particular soil. I would trend, based on those parameters, I would obviously, I'm biased, but trend to use the resin analysis to most accurately represent what is, available in this particular soil. And we can see our phosphorus is a little bit low in this soil. Now, if you look at overall, the two tests actually trended, pretty closely to one another, except for the area of, most concern, which is the pH related to phosphorus and calcium. So we look at potassium, we can see they're both rated low on both tests, as well as some of the micronutrients. So they trended actually pretty close, but the resins actually maybe picked up on the fact that phosphorus may not be available in that particular soil at that pH.
That's super cool.
Yeah, yes. And if we look at the recommendations, we're looking at, a granular recommendation of an 818 type product. This is going to give us a little supplemental P. If it's not actually available, it's going to give us a little supplemental phosphorus with our N and our K that we need. The liquid rec is going to do the same thing in this scenario. And also because we're applying, nutrient every, 4 to 6 weeks during the season, the soil pH is going to trend to come down, which may release a little bit more phosphorus, from that soil. But we'll see. It really depends on the dynamics of this particular soil.
I wanted to point one thing out on the waypoint that I do like is it says towards the bottom, it says Bermuda grass lawn maintenance beginning at green up, apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 every 4 to 6 weeks until early fall. I mean, and this is in South Florida here where that's like a 10-month growing. We're putting down 10 pounds of nitrogen. So thank you, Waypoint, for teaching my people to throw her down 10 pounds of nitrogen. I mean,
I've never recommended 10 pounds of nitrogen, but apparently Waypoint does. So I like them for that.
Yeah, so there's some little things in the recommendations, we like to max our recs out at, 0.75 to 1 pound, depending on, what percentage of the recommendation or the recommended product is slow release versus quick release.
Yeah, and you guys are talking to the audience now. You'll find that in the tests that I do, we've kind of taken out all the pounds on the ground recommendations in that, and really because I just want it to be simple. I just want it to be, here's some products you use to help you head in the right direction. So I've even oversimplified it, and maybe that's to causes some confusion too, because I've even dumbed it down. I don't like that word, but I've simplified it more to be like, hey, you have your test, you see what nutrients you need. Here's some fertilizers you should use, and just head in that direction for the next 12 to 18 months. I look at it more like it's a blood test. You go to the doctor takes your blood. Oh, you're low on iron. So they give you an iron supplement, and they go, now come back in 6 months and we'll test you again. And then in 6 months they go, oh, you know what? You're not corrected yet. We're going to take your iron up, your vitamin D. We're going to take that up. And that's just, you go in that direction. That's kind of how I try to look at it, rather than where I think a lot of our folks look at it like they're a farmer, where they're going to plant corn that they're going to harvest this year. So it's like, nope, I need to get it all in a miracle application right now, because once that corn goes in, it's going to grow and it's off to the races. So part of that too is I don't even put the pounds on the ground. That's mostly me taking that out of there. So.
Yeah. And really, obviously the thing guiding most of the decisions, once you've determined the right, product or nutrient ratio that you need, what's really driving it is, growth rates, how much you're mowing, and the color of the turf. That's really what you're looking at to guide your next fertilizer application.
Totally agree. It's the same. I always take this in a medical. My wife's a nurse, so I know a lot about these things just from hearing her tell me about how unhealthy I am all these years. But, one of the things doctors have gotten away from is asking the patient, how do you feel? I can see what your blood work is, but how do you feel? Your blood work could be awesome, but you feel terrible. Well, that means we need to keep digging and seeing what's going on. But if you feel good, then maybe your blood work's a little off, but you feel good. And this is the same with the lawn. If the lawn looks great, but the pH is a little off, okay, I'm not saying we ignore it, but we also don't need to panic over it, because your lawn has adapted to live in that condition, and that's okay. So, all right, good. Let's, I got a couple more here. You guys got time for a couple more?
Sure.
Yeah, we got all day.
All right. So this is Vince Manners. Let's see, I didn't read his yet, right? Yeah. Okay. Vince Manners. He's been in the community a long time. He has a channel called The Lawngineer. He says, I just saw your post on Facebook asking for questions from the MySoil guys. Here's my question. Does the MySoil and Yard Mastery test determine the cation exchange capacity, CEC, and buffer pH? After doing some research, I found the following link helpful that explains CEC and buffer pH. So he linked us out to talk about CEC, which we talk a lot about, or I don't talk a lot about, but you hear it talked a lot about cation exchange capacity. So why don't you guys go into that? Because it is one of the things that people will ask me often is, why doesn't the test have CEC or buffer pH?
Yeah, so I guess first we'll address the CEC question. So the MySoil Yard Mastery test does not, directly measure or provide a value or number for CEC like you might see on a Waypoint or Spectrum test or some of the other labs. And that's because, essentially this information is built into the analysis and the results that we're getting. Because we are using a cation exchange resin in the test, we're reflecting the levels of cations, in the soil. So basically, if you look at it at a high level sense, because we're exchanging for those, typically a soil is like a low CEC soil, say a sandy soil.
Why don't you explain what that is? I'm going to interrupt you, Chris. Tell us what it is first. Just define cation exchange capacity.
Yeah, so cation exchange capacity essentially is the ability of the soil to hold on to cations. It's really a measure of negative exchange sites in a particular soil. So because cations are positive, they attract to the negative exchange sites on a soil, and that's what determines, how much nutrient a soil can hold or how much you can load it, is really what the measure of CEC is. So a low CEC soil is typically like a sandy soil, that you would have, a smaller amount of these negatively charged sites, to hold on to cations in the soil. And the way that we see those in the Yard Mastery or MySoil test, typically when you have low CEC soils, the results are going to reflect this, because all of the total of cations in the soil, so this is your calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, the total of those is typically going to be, below the optimal range, maybe barely in there, because that soil just can't release enough of them to push it up. So you can't load those type of soils as much. A high CEC soil, or a soil with a lot of exchange sites to hold nutrient, will typically provide total cation results that are in the middle to even way above the optimal range that we have set. And that's because those soils can hold more, they can supply more for a longer period of time. And that's really reflected in the analysis that we get with the MySoil and the Yard Mastery test. So in general, a lot of times we use CEC to determine how we can load these soils. And as I'm talking through this, I'm thinking when in my career I really used CEC, I guess, to make fertility decisions. And I don't know that I used it to make fertility decisions, and really used it, looking at, if we were building a golf course green, looking at specs for sand for like a USGA green, same with percent organic matter, to really just get the specs to build a green. But as far as like every day, or monthly nutrient applications, I mean, it didn't really play a role, I guess. And so if you're going to use that number, you can really tell on the report. If you have low total cations, you're probably going to have to apply more frequently at lower rates, versus the guys that have a much higher level of total cations on their report. You can put more down if you would like to at higher rates, and that could last you a lot longer.
So, but with our test, we're not supplying that. So how would somebody know?
Again, because you don't have the direct measurement, the total amount of those cations that you see, so your potassium, calcium, magnesium, if you do multiple tests, you see that those levels of those nutrients tend to be very low on the scale, and that's because the soil simply can't hold them and provide them. And so we can see that. You'll see that in the test if we want it in the future. Pull up some examples of a low CEC versus a high CEC. We could go ahead and do that and look at those differences visually. And obviously the best way to understand your soil type and how frequent you can probably apply is really to take a soil test or dig up some soil and feel it and see. Most people can determine if they have a higher clay soil or a sandy soil. Mm-hmm. But even with sandy soils, as we talk about, CEC and how much product we can put down at a time, even with sandy soils, a lot of our products now are, 30, 50, 70% slow release. And so even in sandier soils, we can put down higher rates because, say, we have polymer coated products that actually act as almost holding sites that release nutrients slower over time. So even though it's a lower CEC soil, it doesn't mean that we can't put more down if it's the right product. Yeah, and to address the second part of the question on buffer pH. So for the audience, in general, buffer pH is really the ability of a specific soil to resist change in pH. So some soils have the ability, when you apply pH adjustment amendments, to really buffer or resist that change. And that's really what the measurement of buffer pH is. So if you get a liming recommendation, you may also look at a buffer pH. But the way we position this, we don't directly provide a measurement for buffer pH. We may implement this in the future, but we don't really know that we need it because, we've talked a lot about overlap of farming versus what we're doing in perennial turfgrass stands or established turfgrass stands. And the reason is the reason we don't need a buffer pH measurement is because the way we guide these decisions, we can only physically put down so much lime or sulfur to adjust pH at one time. And so because we're wrecking, say, 30 to 50 pounds of lime per application, we're doing this 2 to 3 applications per season. Because we're doing that, that's the maximum amount that you can put down at one time. And so by doing 2 to 3 applications over a season, we're going to monitor the trends in pH over that time and see if we're correcting the pH, and we're going to get that into the optimal range by monitoring over time. A pH buffer measurement on a conventional soil test may say that, based on your pH and liming rec, you need to put down, 200 pounds of lime per 1,000 square feet, which is literally almost physically impossible, on established turf. So even if we had, the buffer pH as it relates to a liming recommendation, we still cannot put that down. So we just guide it differently by recommending, multiple applications and monitoring, which gets you the same result in the end, because you can't physically put down that much lime. And the end result of the whole thing is really, you're going to determine through this process if you need, say, 1 or 2 applications of lime per season to manage your pH every year.
Yeah. So again, it's like I said, it's directional. We don't need, like you said, 200 pounds per 1,000. If you even have a spreader that can spread it. But yeah, so instead of that, trying to fix it all today, just go directionally, just move in that direction. Okay, let's go to the next one. This one comes from, let's see, Matt Romeo. He says, this is kind of relates to what we were talking about. So I want to go in and go over this again, because it's repetition is the key to learning. So he says, why don't they provide specific lime application rates? It's my understanding that their testing method can't produce specific lime recommendations, but the soil tests from Spectrum or Waypoint do. I'd like to know why that is.
Great. Yeah. We talked about this a little bit a minute ago, but I guess to expand on this a little bit, we do recommend lime. We recommend, calcitic or dolomitic lime for low pH soils, depending on, the level of calcium and magnesium in a particular soil sample. So we do lime recommendations. I think it's good to hit on this about the amount of lime. We typically recommend, no more than 30 to 50 pounds of lime per application, even if a soil test says you need 400 pounds, because that's really not possible. So again, we're moving trends in the right direction is the whole goal of how we position our recommendations. Based on the fact that we recommend those 2 to 3 applications per season with continued monitoring, that's our way of being specific on lime recs. One is to choose the right type of lime based on your soil. And the second part of that is to apply it, multiple times during the season, or usually early in the season or late in the season. You typically don't want to apply lime and fertilizer at the same time, because you can really have some counter effects on fertility when you do that. So you want to get your lime down get it incorporated prior to, fertilizer applications is a good way to go about that.
And to clarify for the audience too, so I even had them take the lime recommendations off of our test, the Yard Mastery tests, and we just have 2 products being recommended from Jonathan Green, one for acidic and one for alkaline soils. And the reason I did that is because, and I'll expand more on this later on in the podcast, is because I would send people out to get, lime, and if they got powdered lime, they definitely had a problem. And if they ended up getting, dolomitic lime or pelletized lime, sometimes the pelletized lime, because it's literally limestone, so it's rocks. Some of those rocks would be a 1/2 inch, some of them would be a 1/4 inch, some of them would be an 1/8 of an inch, and some of them would be powdery, and they would put that in their $50 Scott spreader. And they would, first of all, they'd have 2 tons that they had delivered to their house from the garden center, and they'd put that and they break their spreader, and their mouth would taste like rotten Mountain Dew for months because all of it would get in there. It was just bad. So I had so many people come back and go, I'm never doing that again. I'm done. So I went to a product, the Jonathan Green, that's made with a consistent pearl size. It's made to flow easily through spreaders. And yeah, you got to pay a little bit more for that. You pay a little bit more for convenience. But so I did that because I was just tired of having people come back and go, I can't put these rocks down in my lawn, bro. It's not going to work. So that's just part of my philosophy. I'll expand on that later.
There's some other products on the market, that are like, I think the Jonathan Green that has lower use rates where they, supplement with different things that can help raise or lower pH, in conjunction to just straight, lime or elemental sulfur. And let's, some of these products get away with, much lower palatable rates, for the average homeowner.
Yeah. And if you tell a homeowner, hey man, go on Amazon and get elemental sulfur. No, it's just,
right.
It gets too chemistry for them. And again, it's just what I know. So
there's something to remember about pH too, is really pH adjustments can take time. I mean, they can take multiple years, and some soils you may not be able to adjust. It's just based on their makeup. You may not be able to adjust them, but just remember, pH can take, time. Sandier soils sometimes can be a little bit easier to change a little more quickly. Than some other soils, but it does take time to change pH in a lot of different soils. So that's something to remember, is you can't expect just instant results. I mean, it's going to take years in most circumstances.
Mm-hmm. So that's why we talk about going directional.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We got just, looks like just two more here. This one is from Jay in Lincoln, Nebraska. Another pH question. My pH is mildly low at 4.6 and I want to raise it, but my calcium is pretty high at around 450 parts per million. Any recommendations on raising pH without raising the calcium levels? He's attached a photo of his lawn. His lawn looks great, but he wants to know, how can he raise his pH without also raising calcium?
Okay. Yeah. So I know on the scale 450 is rating it as high for calcium, but when we look at high calcium soils, we're talking soils that are like 700 to 1,000 parts per million on, the resin method scale. And so 450 is really not that high. He can go ahead and, apply normal calcium products, whatever he wants to go with. He could, if he needs a little magnesium, he could maybe offset it with a dolomitic lime that has the magnesium. If he wanted to, but the level of calcium that's in that is not a big concern, and he can certainly add more calcium to that soil and be just fine.
Awesome. All right. We got one more. This one's kind of cool. I wanted to know this too, so it's kind of interesting. So this one is from Denny, and Denny says, what is the capacity of your lab? In other words, how many soil tests could you do in a month or a year?
Yeah, I guess I'll take this, Chris, but obviously that really changes seasonally. But I would say just on like a daily capacity, I'll let you guys do the rest of the math, but we can do comfortably 400 to 500 samples a day with current equipment.
That's no joke.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess that's all the questions I had. And, I want to thank you guys for coming on. I don't know how many hours we're coming up on here, but this has been really good, super detailed stuff. Thank you guys for coming on. I love, I want to say to the audience, I like to support startups and entrepreneurs, and that's what these guys are. They're obviously much younger than me, and they are, hard charging entrepreneurs in a startup mode and a new company. And really, they are challenging some traditional norms, which I always like that kind of thing too. So I'm really happy to be partnered with them. The number one reason, though, is they believe in DIY. And that is always something that's very important to me when I start working with a partner, is they need to believe in DIY. I don't want to work with somebody that's works with professionals and just says, yeah, we'll throw you a bone. No, I want somebody that really understands DIY and believes in DIY and what we can do and what we're doing and where we're going. So that is definitely these guys. So before we do go, Chris, Brennan, anything you want to talk about that you have coming up this year? Anything new, anything you're rolling out? You have the floor to tell everybody what you're doing.
I have one maybe final talking point, maybe, and then I'll let Brennan go talk about something. But I guess we've talked about so many things, I guess, when I think about what we went through. But I just want to, get, to stay on track. Really, what we want to focus on is obviously balancing pH, correcting NPK deficiencies by selecting the right products, applying the products, at intervals determined by plant growth and color. Continue to monitor and track your progress, and this will really develop your fertilizer program and balance that's going to work for your, specific situation. And I guess don't lose sight on that based on all the, deep dive that we went into. Back out, at a 10,000 foot level and really focus on, those 4 or 5 things. And I think everybody will be successful.
Awesome. Tell me what you guys got coming up.
Yeah. So I guess just right over Chris's right shoulder, there's kind of a logo there, but just, due to, I guess, a lot of the questions and things that we get on a daily basis, whether that be, online forums, all that sort of thing. We've decided to start a YouTube channel. It's called Soil Lab. And in Soil Lab, we'll actually have running it a gentleman named Matt Williams. He is a soils instructor and has a master's in soil and crop science. And really, I guess the goal with the channel is to bring the why behind these decisions, right? People have all these questions on pH, some of the nutrient interactions, evaluating products, like all those sort of things, and really bringing that into a space that's controlled in our own lab, replicating and really providing that data to why you do that in a palatable format. So that's really the goal with Soil Lab, and look forward to, I guess, kicking off that content.
Good. Well, we'll give a link below. So hopefully you guys will get that set up, at least so people can go over there and get subscribed before you even launch. But that's pretty awesome. I'm really happy that you're going to do that. Really start showing off some of what you guys have done, because I know your facility there is super impressive. And again, running these samples, as many as you can run, you have a lot of capacity. So I'd love to get, and transparency always wins. It just does. So it's about time you guys get out from behind the lab coats and get out there in front of everybody. So awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you for your partnership with us. And I just want to say one other thing, guys. The soil test will be integrated in our app. It's actually there. I just had the final demo yesterday. These guys have worked really hard. I've asked them for a lot of things to be able to get the data from the soil tests into our app, and they have said yes on everything. The answer is never no. Another reason I really like them, the answer is never we can't. The answer is we will figure it out. They've gone to a lot of expense to make sure that we can get that, and that will be in the app now. So I just want you to know that, again, another partner that is investing not only in what I'm asking to do, but what you guys are going to want to do. And it's going to make the app that much better when we have that in there. So again, thanks guys. Thank you for your partnership and your friendship. And I guess I'll see you in the lawn.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.